if you're learning JavaScript, this is a perfect project to practice classes while building something that will be useful for you when you are trying to look for a job. And again, we're just trying to create a little bit of a job tracker and utilize classes in order to help us out with doing this. Now, this is what we're going to be building here. If you take a look, I can go ahead and submit this, and notice that the table will populate as well once I click on the OK. And this is where you can keep track of things, and we can hit the delete button if we no longer wanted to see it anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the one that I just added. And notice that we also keep the data persistent with a refresh of the screen. Okay, so that is what we're going to build out. I'm going to be providing you all with the HTML and CSS because I want this to solely focus on getting the information from the form and bringing it into your JavaScript and being able to manipulate the data and display the data in the tables. All right, so I'm in Visual Studio Code, and if you are unfamiliar with Visual Studio Code, make sure you take a look down below in the description. I'm going to put a link there. There's a free course series that gets your Visual Studio Code up looking like mine. And so that way you're able to use things like Live Server. So I'm going to go ahead, you can right click this and open with Live Server. I already have mine working right now. So again, going down here and going to Live Server is what you would want to do in order to start it up. And again, it's on the index.html page. Given the code here, just a real quick overview, I do have some dummy data in here already, and there's 0 JavaScript right now that is going to be running, and I am linking the JavaScript up on my line 92, so that way we know that it is working as long as they're all co-located files. This is what we should see in the browser right now when we did the live server. Again, nothing too complicated here. The buttons do not work, and you see a bunch of dummy data that's in there. We're going to be writing some JavaScript here shortly that's going to clear out the tables and everything, but I always try to teach this is, let's take this into steps. Let's break it down on what needs to happen for us to grab information from that form and utilize it. So we're going to go through a few things that I would like to do first in the JavaScript file. So that's what I'm going to go to next. And so in here, I'm going to go ahead and stub out some things that I know that I would like to do. And the very first thing is I would definitely put a little comment in here, and I want to define what a job application looks like. And so I'm going to put that in here. All right. So I want this job application class to be created. I know that I'm going to need it here. Let's see what other things that just off the top of my head that I know that we're probably going to need. And that is going to be maybe a form submission for the form information. And I'm going to go ahead and leave it at that for now. So the first thing that we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and create a class called job application. So let's go ahead and do a class. I'm going to call it job application. And I'm just going to have the curly brackets in there. So in the class of job application, every class typically gets a constructor. And this is where every time we create an instance of a class, this constructor method gets called. And for now, I really want the constructor not to take anything in. No arguments are going to be going into it, but what the constructor will do for us is just create an empty array for us to add in all of the job applications that we have applied for. So I'm just going to go ahead and add a little bit of the constructor here. We're going to do left and right parentheses, curly bracket. And then in here, I'm just going to create an empty array. I'm going to call it job applications. And anytime we're inside of a class, we're going to utilize that keyword this. So that way it knows that it's referring to this instance. And I'm just going to call it job application and add an S on there. I'm going to set that equal to an empty array. All right. So now when we create this instance of this job application, it's going to just get a simple empty array. And we can demonstrate this here by creating a new instance of a job application and console logging the applications. So I do want to fix this, or I'm just going to camel case it and not have that be in uppercase. So I'm going to create a variable down here. I'm just going to say, let my job application equal new job application. And then I'm just going to console log my job application dot job applications. And we should get an empty array here as we're trying this out. So let's go ahead and go over to the browser. And in the browser, we're going to go ahead and open up our dev tools here. So I'm going to right click and inspect. And here in the console, we should see an empty array, which is what we see right here. Okay. So perfect. Our very simple class that we have so far is working as advertised. Let's see what we have to do next. So we're back in Visual Studio Code here, and what I would like to do next is I want to go out there and start to grab information from the form. And if we take a look at our form, we are given the form ID here of job-application.form. So we can utilize query selector and grab this form, and then we want to add an event listener to it. So that's going to be my next couple steps here. So let's go ahead and add a couple lines here. We're going to create a new variable here called form element. And the form element, we are going to go and grab the ID. That's why I put that hashtag in there of the job application form. Once we have it, we can then move on to adding an event listener to it. And we want to add the event, or we want to listen for the event submit. So we're going to come down here below this line, and we're going to say form element. We want to add an event listener, and we want to listen for the submit. Okay. Now, this does take two parameters on here. The first one is what are we looking for, which is the submit. And then what goes on the right side of here is the callback function that you would like to utilize when somebody actually clicks on that button. And for right now, I'm going to go ahead and put in left and right parentheses. I am going to put the word event in there. And then I'm going to utilize the arrow function with a curly bracket. And then I'm going to close everything off here. Now, what I typically like to do when I'm first learning this and teaching this to students is I definitely want to make sure that the default behavior of the form doesn't refresh my browser. So the very first thing I want to put in here is the event prevent default. And we want to make sure that we do want to put those left and right parentheses on there because we do want to invoke this. And that's just going to ensure us that page is not going to refresh on us. And then I want to put a console log in here just to double check to make sure that this code is working, because there's nothing worse than coding everything out and not taking breaks and checking the console for some of these actions, especially when we're first starting out and learning this stuff. Okay, so let's head over to the web browser and take a look at the console. So now that I'm over in the web browser here, notice in our console over here on the right, I don't see the submit button until I actually click it. And then again, you can click it as many times as you wish, but you can see the console log is working. So we know that our event listener is working. All right. So let's go ahead and go back to the code and finish out some of our thoughts on this. All right, so I added a few things here just for some notes. I want to make sure that inside of our event listener here, that we're storing the values into an object that we are collecting from the form. That's one of the first things that we want to do. The next, once we have that object built, we would like to add those items to the array. And so we're going to create a method on our class in order to help us out with that. And then the last thing here is we want to notify the user that the form has been submitted with just a real simple alert. So those are the three things that we would like to do inside of this form element. Now, the reason that I have the split screen up is it's important for when we're creating this object. And I'm just going to create a real simple variable here. I'm going to call it job application data. And I'm just going to set that open to an empty curly bracket for now. And we're going to fill in the information. So I'm just taking a look at the form, and the very first one is company. So let's go ahead and add that. So I'm just going to do company, and then I'm going to do colon. Now, the next thing that I put over here on the right-hand side is what do I want to put in there? And I'm going to utilize the form element and grab the value. Now, for the company, I will use the following here, and then I'm just going to put a comma. Now, let's take a look and understand why I'm doing it this way. So the form element, we grabbed it from up here, right? And we have access to the input fields that came from that form. And why do I have this square bracket here with quotes and company? What does that relate to? We gave our input a name. And so that's very important when you're creating the forms. It's not just because it's pulling it from the ID, it's pulling it from the name. And that's going to help us out with it. So I'm just utilizing square bracket notation. Of course, you can use dot notation here, like form element dot company dot value, but I like the square bracket notation. It just makes it a little more readable for myself. All right. And we're just going to follow this pattern that we created. So the next one is position. And notice that we named it position. And whatever goes on the left-hand side, that's totally up to us. But most of these are going to be the same. So we have the position. Perfect. Next is looks like the date. So let's go ahead and go to it. And we're going to utilize the form element square bracket date dot value. And then the next one is the status. So we're just moving on down the line here because the name is status here. And then the last one here, I believe, is the notes. So let's take a look at it, which is here. So the name is notes. So we'll do notes, and then it's going to be form element notes dot value. And that is it for the job application data. I can go ahead and get rid of these here to make this a little nicer. But visually, we're not going to see anything quite yet until we console log this. So I'm going to do a real quick console log of the job application data, and we should see our values that we've actually typed in. So let's go ahead and go to the browser and take a look at it. So what you want to do on here is you want to take a look at the job application form. You want to go ahead and fill in every single one. This is like you testing out what you just got done doing. Notice that we're just doing a little bit of coding and then we're testing it out. We're not assuming that it works. We're just stepping things out. Once we add a feature, we're testing it out. You're going to hit the submit button. And once you do, you'll notice that you'll get something over here. Looks just like an object. Perfect. That's what we need. And now we have the curly brackets. We have the company XYZ. You're double checking to make sure that all the items match up. We got the position, we got the status, and the notes. So that all looks perfect. So now we can go back to the code and create an add new job application method. So that way we're able to keep everything in the class and it can all be self-contained. So let's go ahead and go back to it. Okay, so this is where we left off. We want to add the object to the job applications array by utilizing a method. Well, let's go ahead and scroll up to the top here. This is where we defined our class. Let's add our very first method to this class, and it's going to be called add. So we're going to create one called application, and we do need to supply it with an argument or a parameter. And I'm just going to call this one job application, okay, because we know that it's an object coming in. And what do we want to do? We want to push this new information, right? We want to push this to our job applications that is built inside of our class. So this is what we're going to do. This dot job applications dot push, and then we just want to push that object that we put in there. Okay. Now let's go ahead and test this out here. We're going to come back down here. And this is where we're going to utilize that brand new method that we created. Now, remember, we are referencing the class that we talked about, right? That we just got done creating up here from line 13. So this is where a lot of students, they may get a little confused a little bit with how do I access that method? Let's call the variable that we created, right? So it's going to be my job application. And then what do we want to do with it? We want to call that method of add job application. Okay, what do we want to give it? We want to give it our brand new job application data that we collected from the form. And so that is it right there. And then we want to notify the user that the form has been submitted. And we can do with a simple click right there with an alert, form submitted, and they will be notified utilizing the browser. All right, so we did a few things in here. Let's go ahead and test this out in the browser. Okay, let's give this a try. I'm going to go ahead and hit the submit button. I should see the alert show up. All right, perfect. Next is how do I check to see if it truly worked or not? We can come over here to the console. We should be able to type in the my job application and then hit the period. And then we're going to go ahead and type in the job applications. And we should now see that we get the array with the XYZ company, and that looks really good. Okay, that's exactly what we wanted to see. We're going to be creating some other methods in here because we actually want to display this on the page, right? So we should probably create a couple functions, one to maybe clear the table. So that way we can get rid of all the information, and then we can add some more methods in our class. That way we're able to retrieve that array instead of typing in the console, right? So let's go ahead and go back to the code and work on it. Okay, so we want to clear out the table, or at least the table body, right? All of this information with our dummy data with Google, Facebook, and everything, it's all contained in this element here called table body. We did give it an ID here for us. That way we're able to use that query selector and go ahead and grab it. So let's do that. And then we're going to really clear the table. The way we're going to do it is we're just going to replace the HTML that's in between the body tags. We're just going to clear it all out. We're going to set it equal to an empty string. So it's going to be a real simple function for us to use, but because we're utilizing it more than once, we'll make it a function rather than just have it built in to something else. So let's go back to our JavaScript file. I added a couple more notes here on what we want to do. Table information, that's where we're just going to go out there and we're going to grab the table element. And we just want the body element. So I'm just going to come in here and we're going to do job application table body element equals document.query selector. And then we just went and grabbed the ID that came from that element. That's all we did here. And then we want to go ahead and create a function in order to clear this table out. I'm going to go ahead and create a function here called clear table. And we are going to utilize the inner HTML and just reset it to an empty string. Now let's test to see if this works. If we take a look at our table right now in the browser, it is still showing the dummy data. That's because we haven't called the function yet. And so that's what we're going to do now just to test it out. And we're going to do clear table. And if we take a look at the browser, our table should be gone. Let's see if that happened. And notice that it did go away. All of our dummy data has disappeared, although we didn't actually alter anything in our HTML file because it still has Google, it still has Software Engineer, and so on, right? So this has not changed, but because we're utilizing JavaScript, we changed that inner HTML, set it to empty strings, and it just cleared it all out. All right. So let's talk about what we need to do next by getting the table to display the information. Okay. All right. So I don't need the clear table in here anymore. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of it. I am, however, going to create a new function here, and it doesn't take any kind of arguments whatsoever, but inside here, I will go ahead and clear the table here. So I'm going to do clear table, left and right parentheses. Okay. Now, when do I want this table to be built? I do want it to be built over here, where as soon as we get done alerting the user, let's go ahead and build the table by calling the function. Okay. So that's what we want to do next. And that's where we're going to come down here and just do display data and build table. So I'll go ahead and save that here. And then the next thing that I would like us to do is let's go ahead and create a new method up in our job applications. And its sole purpose, again, this is just for practice. I know that we can get the information from the class, but I would like to just create a simple, basically get me all the jobs, just return all the jobs in an array. And what we're going to do in here, I'm just going to call it like this. I'm going to say get all job applications. And what do I want to send back? I want to return the job applications. Just something real simple. And now I can come down here in our code for the displaying of the table. And I'm just going to create just another variable here. I'm just going to call it let job applications equal my job applications. And I'm just calling that method. So really, I'm just returning the array. Again, I could totally not do that by instead just doing job applications dot and then job applications, right? But we want to practice utilizing methods in order to get information from the class that we created up there. Okay. Next, once we have that information, then it's going to be really easy for us to loop through the information and display it. And how am I going to go about it? I'm going to do something like this. I'll do job applications equal, and then we're going to do the job applications and we can do a map, or we can do a for each. I'll just do a for each, because that might be just a little bit simpler for us to wrap our heads around. And then I'm going to go ahead and say job applications index with an arrow function. And then we're just going to close this off here. Now, what's going on here is we are looping through all of the job applications that we have submitted so far. And now we're going to, what we would like to do is simply display the information on the table. Okay. And inside here, I'm going to create a variable here called let row, because this is going to indicate a row for us. And we want to utilize the DOM here, and we want to create the element. So we're going to create a TR, a table row. And notice that if I take a look at the index file here, this is what we're trying to create, is what goes in between each one of these. Okay. And so once we create it, we're going to replace the inner HTML in it, and then we're going to append this element that we just got done creating and append it to the table body. So kind of cool process to think about. But let's go over here. And if you wanted to take notes on this, is we're creating the table row element. Okay. Next is we're going to replace the inner HTML. So we're going to replace the inner HTML. Okay. And how are we going to do that? We're going to do row dot inner HTML equals backticks. I'm just going to hit the enter key and do another backtick. I'll give myself some room here, because I'm going to come into my index.html, and I'm going to essentially just copy this, and then I'm going to paste it into my line 72. Okay. And again, if you want to make it look pretty, I'm holding the shift button down while hitting the tab button to move these over to make them a little more. So what goes here? This one is going to be the job application. So I'm going to copy this here, and I'm going to delete this, $, curly brackets. And inside the curly brackets, I'm going to do job application dot, okay, and then I'm going to do company, okay. And we're going to do this exact same thing for the other ones. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video and complete that for us. And all right, so this is what it should go ahead and look like for you all. It's just job application dot company dot position dot date dot status, and all of this comes from what we did up here, which is company, position, date, status, and notes. Okay, so that's where that comes from. Next, let's go ahead. I believe we are ready for appending this, is what we want to do next. At the end of each one of these loops, our final thing that we would like to do is we would like to append that row to the table body. And this is what we would like to do here. So we're going to go ahead and utilize the job application table body element, and then we want to append it to it. And what do we want to append? We want to append the row that we just got done completing in our JavaScript. So I think this should go ahead and run for us. Now, one thing that we would need to do for it, just for starting out, we'll go ahead and do this to start it off, because we want to display the table at the very beginning with the data that it has. Okay, I know we don't have any way of retaining the data quite yet. That's just because we haven't built out the functionality in our class quite yet to handle a save yet, where we want to save it, store it in to local storage, and then bring it back. So let's go ahead and test out the small functionality in the browser to see if we can get that table row to show up. So head into there next. All right, so in the web view here, I have some information already populated. I'm going to go ahead and hit the submit button, and let's see if we get the alert. Perfect. And then the table should build out. Great. That seems to work just fine. But here's the problem, is if we refresh the page, our table is gone, right? And that's because we don't have really a mechanism right now in our class to say, hey, let's every time we save the form information, let's go ahead and save it to local storage. And then on a page refresh, let's go ahead and get that stuff out of local storage to display, right? So let's go ahead and test this out. All right, so back in Visual Studio Code, we're going to add a couple more methods to our class. And that way we're able to save things to the local storage, and we're able to load things from the local storage on a page load, for example. So let's go ahead and create a new method here. We're going to call this one save job applications to local storage. And inside here, so I'm going to go ahead and create this down here. And inside of this method, we're going to utilize the local storage. Okay, and we're going to invoke the set item. And here is what we are creating: a key in our local storage to reference later. And we definitely want to stringify, JSON.stringify this .job applications. Okay, this is what's going to store anything. Every time we add a new job application, it's simply going to replace whatever is in there for local storage now and supply it with this .job applications, which happens to be our array of job applications that we are continually to add from the form. So that way it's always saved into the browser's memory. Next is, when should we invoke this? That would be a good question to ask yourself. When we hit the add button from the form, submit, we should be able to not only update, we're pushing it here. Right after that, let's go ahead and invoke the method that's on the class and save it. Okay, so we're doing these all internally in the class, which is neat. Okay, so once we saved it, how do we get it back? We need to create one for when we're loading, for example. And so let's create a method over here. So not only we're saving the jobs, let's go ahead and load them. Okay. And how are we loading them? Just like we have a set item, we're able to get an item back. But sometimes, and especially the very first time that the page is visited, we're not going to have anything in there. And so really we should try to grab the information from there. And if we get something back, great, use it. Otherwise, let's go ahead and do an empty array instead. So we can come in here and add the following lines of code. So I'm just going to create a variable here called stored jobs. And remember, we put it into the local storage with the JSON stringify. We need to parse that JSON once we get it back. And this is just an OR operator, basically saying, hey, if this comes back undefined or null, then let's just go ahead and utilize square brackets. And then lastly, we need to update our instance of the job applications. So what do I mean by that? We can do something like this. We can say this dot job applications equals stored jobs. Okay. Again, I know that we could simplify this a little more, maybe making it just a single line of code, but as students, as learners, I think stepping these things out in an ordered fashion will help hopefully make that make sense to everyone. Okay, so when do we want to call this one? That is a great question, and we can come up here to our constructor. Remember, we just got done setting it to an empty array. This is where we would want to invoke that method. When we create it from the constructor's point of view, we're going to go ahead and invoke it right now. It means that, hey, it's going to take a look at what is there, and it's either going to come back with nothing or it's going to come back with something. Okay, so we just added a bunch of code here, and we're going to test things out to see if we're able to view these things happening in the browser. So I'm going to show you how to do that in the DevTools next. Okay, so this part here is going to be very browser specific. And where is local storage found? I'm utilizing Chrome, and typically any browser that you have, you are going to have access to the local storage. But Chrome, it's under the application. And if you're not seeing the applications, because maybe you're on a different one here, use these chevrons and navigate to the proper one that you need. And for our case, it's applications. You're going to see local storage here. All right. Yours should be blank. In order to clear out local storage, if you do have some stuff in here from working on other projects, this is the clear all. That will clear out everything. All right. So let's take a look at this. I'm going to go ahead and add some information here. We'll make that position programmer date applied, throw in some values, and we're just going to make sure that we have some notes in here just to see if it shows up here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the submit button. And again, think about what's happening behind the scenes. Hit the submit button. I get the form saying, yes, it worked. Over here, I now get a new key called job applications. And I have this all nice and stringified in here. Okay. So again, I can select this. I can take a look at the information down here, company XYZ. Perfect. Everything looks really good. Let's test out the refresh aspect of this. I'm going to go ahead and refresh the page here. And notice that local storage stayed, and we still have all of our tables still there as well. So again, play around with it. You can add more things to it. Now, the last thing that we need to add to this is the delete button aspect. And just to show you what that would look like, and then we can add a method for the delete, and then we can implement that inside of our loop that we're doing for displaying the table. We can add just a little bit of a delete button for us to click on, and it call the proper method in order to delete something. So let's go ahead and try that. All right, so we're back in the code here, and what do we need to do next? Let's go ahead and add a delete button real quick. And for this, I'm just going to make another table data element, add a button in there. I just gave it a class here of delete-btn, and that's so that later on we're able to grab them all utilizing query selector all, just doing a little future planning here. And this right here is a data attribute for us to reference later on in the code, so that way we know exactly which one we want to delete. And again, we're getting the index from our for each loop from up here. Okay, so once we have that, we should be able to take a look at the browser here. We should see a delete button that is now showing up. Let me go ahead and shrink this up. So we should see a delete button here, but clicking on it obviously does nothing for us. So let's go ahead and get that working in our code. So in the code, we're going to go ahead and do a couple things. One is let's go ahead and add a delete job application method to our class. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll back up here. So we have a get all. Let's go ahead and add a delete job application. And again, the purpose of this is to simply remove the one that we clicked on. Okay, so I'm going to start it right here. And so it does take an argument there called index. And what do we want to do in here? We want to utilize the splice. So we're going to do a little surgery here. So we want to slice it at the index, and we only want to do it and nothing else. And that will help us modify that original array. And if we're doing any kind of modifications on there, then we definitely want to also save the job to the local storage, right? So we want to update that local storage so that way we have it. So we're going to utilize that method again. The same method that we did for adding, we want to utilize that exact same one for removal as well. All right, now we can go ahead and come all the way down here, and let's go ahead and add some click events to those delete buttons. And we're going to do this all inside of the display and build tables, because that's where it belongs. And we're just going to do this for a note, add event listeners for the delete button. And we're going to utilize the document query selector all. Okay. Now we are able to daisy chain things if we wanted. And so I'm just going to call this one let delete button equal. And then we're going to go ahead and do document.query selector all. And then we're just going to grab them all. Now, because this gives us back an array, we are then able to do something like this. We can say delete buttons for each, and for every button that we come in contact with when we're creating this, we're going to go ahead and add an event listener to it. Okay, what do we want to add? We want to add the click. Okay, and then we're going to utilize this callback function here. Let me go ahead and close these things off here and give us some room to work. So we want to grab the index, okay? Because like right now we don't know what it is, but we can from that data index attribute that we added, okay? So we're gonna go ahead and grab it, and then we can call the job application deletion method that we created up above. And then once we are done with it, then we want to go ahead and display the table. Okay. All right. Let's see what we got here. And I believe we might be missing a curly bracket here with a parenthesis. All right. So got a couple of nested functions within functions, but this should provide us with a way to delete and then obviously rebuild the table afterwards. Okay. All right. Let's test this out and see if it works. All right, so what are we looking for here when we're testing this out? And the delete button, when we click on it, it needs to remove it from the table. And then it also needs to update our local storage here. So those are the two things that we're looking at when we're pressing this button. So if I click on the delete button, notice that it goes away, and then the table over here for the key values for the job applications, it has gone away also. Very cool, very nice. And then we can, of course, hit the submit button and add it again if we need, and we can try this with multiple ones just to make sure that it's grabbing the right one. So if I hit the delete button here, it should only delete that one and should not delete the other one. And it looks like it's all working. There you have it. Hopefully you enjoyed this lesson, a little bit with classes, a little bit with methods, and maybe even something that you might want to use for your own self when you are trying to apply for jobs. You can use this as a quick little tracker, right? If you like this lesson, make sure you like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.